Hola y bienvenidos de nuevo a Oportunidades en Grecia, el podcast en el que tratamos de acercar las oportunidades en el marco de la internacionalización, de la exportación, la inversión y la captación de financiación que el país, Grecia, presenta para la empresa española. Welcome again to Oportunidades en Grecia, the podcast where we try to present business opportunities regarding exports and investments in the country, Greece to Spanish companies. Today, we'll talk about venture capital. And we couldn't have a better candidate to do so than Vivi Papasouli. Vivi, good morning, how are you?
Hi, Jorge, thanks for inviting.
Good friend, mandate manager at the European Investment Fund, EIF, for the region with a broad experience in the sector. 6 years already in this last position. Let me introduce briefly the EIF and a little bit of data on the market, and we go on with the questions. So the EIF is part of the EIB group, European Investment Bank Group. Its mission is to improve access to finance for SMEs and small mid-caps in Europe. And it does it by supporting emerging and established fund managers with equity investments and by designing debt financing instruments that share risk taken by financial institutions when they lend or invest in these SMEs and small caps. It sort of kind of brings support or supports bringing closer entrepreneurs through its extensive network of financiers, partners, and so on and so forth. With regards to the market, to the Greek market, I would like to mention that the business environment has been increasing or getting better and better in the last few years. It escalated 16 positions in 2021, the country that escalated most positions when it comes to business environment. FDI being in 2021 that of 6 billion plus, which was a record in the country for the last 20 years, but it was overmounted, was increased even in 2022. The amounts there were even bigger. And a couple things I would like to mention about the startup ecosystem already. 301 startups have raised capital lately, up to a tune of 2.4 billion euros of capital invested, and the community builders is incorporates 100 plus institutions, where there are different players. I will ask you about this right away, such as Elevate Greece, the Hellenic Development Bank of Investments, the EIF, of course, universities, corporations, and so on and so forth. So, without further delay, Vivi, let me ask you a little bit about the landscape of the VC, the venture capital ecosystem in Greece. When did it get activated? What is the size of it these days?
Yeah. So the venture capital ecosystem in Greece actually started developing from a very, very nascent stage back in 2009, 2010. That was the year when the European Investment Fund was entrusted the first public financing from the Greek authorities, the Ministry of Economy and Development at the time. Those was known as the Jeremy initiatives. That was at the European level given by structural funds. So at the time, the EIF started with a rather scarce financing of 50 million, and it kick-started the development of the VC ecosystem by supporting 4 funds, focusing mainly on the ICT sector, and primarily at the pre-seed, seed, and early stage of development of underlying companies. The Jeremy initiative started in 2010, so we signed the funds in 2011, 2012. It concluded its investment period by 2016. We had a total of 63 companies, total invested amount of around 70 million. Now, the Jeremy initiative was the first, let's say, kickstart of the ecosystem. We have a lot of questions on how did it go, what's the return, the returns that it actually yielded. I think the main result of the Jeremy initiative is that it kickstarted a very nascent ecosystem, and that was followed at the end of December 2016, but by what we now know as the Equifund initiative. So the Equifund initiative was actually the biggest initiative of the Hellenic government. It entrusted the EIF with another 200 million that actually had three separate windows. So it was the first time that the public initiative managed by the EIF supported all growth levels of the ecosystem, so both innovation, early stage, and the growth stage. So from the pre-seed, early stage, and growth stages of enterprises. There were 9 funds supported on the grounds, and these 9 funds, with an initial support of 200 million from the Greek government, 60 million of own resources from the European Investment Fund, managed to leverage a total of more than 600 million at the fund's level. So as of today, we have 133 companies supported through the Equifund initiative. The Equifund funds have given more than 300 million in these companies. And at the companies level, because obviously these companies grow and they leverage money not only from the funds, but also from private investors, but also funds outside the Equifund initiatives, we now have almost 600 million leveraged at that level as well. So overall, as of today, the most recent reports show that the valuation of the VC ecosystem in Greece in the previous year is estimated around 8 billion. This includes the first unicorn, like Viva Wallet, that is not part of our portfolio, but still it's part of the VC ecosystem. And the top 10 companies have a valuation of around 6 billion. Now, one can discuss a lot about valuations, because obviously valuations go up and down, and the financing rounds depend also on the economic environment. But this is a very, very good, let's say, estimation of how a very nascent ecosystem just 12 years ago has really, really developed throughout these years.
Well, these are some astonishing amounts, 8 billion euros. Is there any specific, I assume there is not, but is there any specific regulation in the venture capital world ecosystem in Greece? And digging a little bit into the ecosystem, what are the main players in it? Could you tell us a bit more about the role of Elevate Greece, the European Commission, the HDBI, and the AF yourself?
Sure. So specific regulation about the VC system, not really. There has been a shift of interest, let's say, from the public sector the past years around the ecosystem, because now they actually understand the dynamic of this sector. I think the Elevate Greece initiative is part of this shifting interest. So the Elevate Greece started back in 2020, initially as a register of startups. So it started initially in the midst of the COVID crisis to support the startups so that they could actually help the startups with grants also through the COVID, because through the COVID crisis, because they didn't have a register of startups and they didn't have any other way to support. Now this initiative has evolved to a public company. And I think the idea there is to put together a public company that will help companies in a number of ways, the startups in a number of ways, including mentoring, including offering a number of services and other support to the startup systems, to the companies. HDBI is the National Promotional Bank of Greece. Actually, HDBI has a very long story in Greece. It started as what we know as Taneo, that is more commonly known, let's say, in Greece. It was a very innovative company at the time, back in 2000 when it started. So Taneo really tried to kickstart the ecosystem way ahead of its time, back in 2000 in Greece. And actually at the time I heard a story by its CEO, Antigoni Liverpool, recently, that it visited Luxembourg at the time to meet our first colleagues. In 2000, there were about 40 or 50 of us sitting in Luxembourg in the EIF then to exchange expertise. So they started then for different reasons, political, market related. It didn't go well, so it didn't really fly at the time. But HDBI was really reinstituted in 2019, and now they are really picking off. And for the EIF, having a strong national promotional bank on the equity side, on the ground, is super important for the development of the ecosystem. We really want to have a good counterpart on the ground, and we are in very good cooperation with HDBI. And they are now picking up the more generic VC ecosystem on the ground. And I think the Commission is a bit more, I will say distant, but not in the sense of distant. It's not their role to be hands-on on these markets. But it is the Commission money that is kickstarting this ecosystem. So the Jeremy initiatives kickstarted with public financing coming from structural funds. And now Equifund came from structural funds as well. So in a sense, the regulatory framework of structural funds comes in these equity markets. And it is not evident because for years on years, the Commission only used structural funds to provide grant financing. It has been a big shift in the mentality of the Commission to give this public financing to financial instruments. And there is a whole unit of the Commission that is strongly supporting financial instruments, understanding the great dynamics that they have, because this public financing of financial instruments coming from the Commission have this revolving nature that basically money comes back to the public resources, and the member states have more and more money to keep financing the startup ecosystem and the SMEs on the ground.
Just to dig a little bit on this, or could you elaborate a little bit? So the funding, in each of the institutions, you get different funding, I understand. EIF, HDBI, and European Commission. The funding is different, and you guys are complementary, let's say, or you work together for some of this funding, with some of this funding, or...
So the Commission basically entrusts the money to the member states, or the Commission can entrust the money to the EIF directly. So we have two pots, basically. We work for the Commission, we get entrusted money for the Commission. This is the EU mandates we run. We also get regional mandates, where it's the area where I work, where we get entrusted money from the governments, the regional governments. Now, the regional mandates we have is more in the underdeveloped ecosystem. So I'm overlooking also, Greece, Cyprus, Bulgaria. So in the underdeveloped ecosystems, we do have money coming in from the regional governments in order to help them, the ecosystems, reach the medium ecosystems of other developed markets like Spain, for example. So in order to get our ecosystems to that level, we need more money on the ground. So we use structural funds that are basically, again, European money entrusted to the member states in order to get the money on the ground to help the startups. So it is still European money, but they are entrusted by the member states. It's called shared management, without going into a lot of terminology and confusing everybody. Both us and HDBI, eventually we become limited partners to the funds. So we're investors in the funds. Now, in the previous years in Equifund, in the Greek funds, we were limited partners. HDBI was not. But in the new successor funds that are currently being raised, we are actually limited partners, both us and HDBI. Elevate Greece, it's another story. It's a register. It's now a public company. It does not take the role of a limited partner, not yet. It doesn't have that role. It has a different scope that is more to mentor and support the companies at other levels.
That's pretty much what I thought, but I wanted to sort of like to picture the whole thing, to map the whole thing, whole ecosystem all together. Let's get down a little bit to the activity of the funds. What's the usual size of one of these funds we're talking about? I think you mentioned 9 funds in the scope of Unifund. What is the usual size of one of these funds? Or are they mainly focused in investing in Greece? Can they invest in the region? What would be a standard ticket when they invest in Greece, for instance?
Yeah, that's a very, very fair question. I think it depends, is the answer. It depends on the investment strategy. It depends on the stage of the companies in which they invest. And, it's also a matter of the targeted market. So for Greece, I mentioned already that the Equifund has 3 windows. We have the innovation window, the early stage window, and the growth window. So for the innovation window, we started to target the pre-seed and seed stage. So companies that do not really have a complete business in their hands yet. So it's very, very a business idea or a business project that has not been tested in the market. And there we typically have funds between 20, 30, 35, 40 million maximum. And they give tickets. Well, we started with the idea of giving even smaller tickets, so 50K, but eventually the market, led to bigger tickets. But typical tickets are around 200K, 500 or 600K. Just to note, we don't have clear quotes. It doesn't have red lines per se, but these are the typical tickets. Now, the early stage window targeted a bit more mature companies that had actually tested the products a bit on the market. They might have a couple of clients already. And the size there was about 50 to 70 million of the fund. And they targeted tickets of 1 to 5 million, usually, in the companies. And then the growth window targeted more established companies. Typically, they targeted also more traditional sectors. So although the innovation in the early stage was more into deep tech, more into ICT, more into B2B, B2C, even AI or cybersecurity, more innovative sectors. The growth window targeted more traditional sectors on the ground, and there the tickets were 5 to 10 million, typically, more or less. Now, these are the Equifund ranges, let's say, that we had some years ago. Obviously, the market is developing. So now we have, for example, a new business angel fund on the ground that is actually financed by Jeremy reflows. So from the initiative of Jeremy, we got money back and we were able to reinvest in the market. This is a 20 million business angel co-investment window that can put money on the ground, even of 50K. That needs to co-invest with the business angels, and this is how we try to also work a bit with the business angels on the ground and help the companies that are very, very early stages of their development.
Linking this with the next question, so I understand that most of these funds, they do invest in Greece. Is there a certain scope to do pan-European activity? And could the investors invest in the region, beyond the borders, or have part of the funds? Could they have part of the investments outside Greece, or activity that goes beyond the borders of Greece?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question and a long-term discussion with all of our fund managers. These funds are a bit restricted by the source of financing. So basically, public funds come with a number of restrictions by default. I get a lot of nagging about the restrictions that the public funds bring. The truth is there is no free money on the market, and I think the restrictions that we have are not so bad. But the truth is that the structural funds in the past have come with a restriction that they only have to be committed or deployed in the country. So the funds that we have deployed in the past have had these kind of restrictions that the companies that are being supported need to have an establishment, a branch, or a strong presence in the country of development. So up to now, the funds have been very focused in Greece. Moving on to the successor funds, and I think the Commission and the people who are creating the regulations that are giving in the financing have understood the difficulties in deploying in a pan-European level funds, and now there is more flexibility moving forward to deploy more regional funds. I think this is also of interest at the European level, because basically you cannot really restrict a fund or a company to a specific geography. You really need to go pan-European in order to be more competitive and in order to use all the opportunities that we have on the ground, especially in the Southeast Europe, where we have even smaller markets, where we really need to combine and go more large scale to go competitive. Now, a pan-European fund coming out of Greece, I don't think we are still there, to be fair, because you really need the expertise of the fund managers also. You really need to have a foot on many countries in order to go there. And then we would definitely need a good cooperation with bigger markets like Spain in order to have access to these markets to slowly build a more pan-European focus.
Well, that's what I was a little bit my approach. I mean, I think you eventually need to scale up the projects, and that maybe needs of a regional approach or something like that. It makes sense that as a start, the idea is to develop the local market, but eventually, as they mature the projects, probably they need to be scale up or have a scale up vision so that investors could fund further the projects. Very interesting everything that you're telling us, Vivi. Which sectors? I talked to some of the managers, and they talked about several sectors. But which are the sectors that are more prone to have investments? I heard life science, artificial intelligence, new materials, millennial economy, B2B software. Is there anything specific where you get more demand? I think you would see more demand in this sector.
I think that back in the Equifund era, let's say, the funds started as more sector agnostic. This typically comes with more underdeveloped markets. When you have an immature market, you cannot expect that you have the depth to develop specific sectors. So we started like that. The truth is that in the early stage window, we had selected 2 fund managers that by default had their expertise on the IT sector, ICT sector, one in B2B more and one in B2C, again with no red lines. So both of them kind of had a couple of companies in their portfolio that expanded to other sectors as well. But the major focus was in these sectors, and the growth window went in more traditional sectors like food and beverage, like agriculture, etc. Now, as the market keeps evolving, we do have a more specific focus. We see fund managers focusing, for example, in deep tech, focusing in AI, focusing in more areas that they understand, and they build expertise also, because these are new sectors of the economy. Fintech, for example, AI. These are also building sectors that now they also extend their network of mentors. They extend their understanding on these sectors as well. On the life sciences, there is a very interesting community being built, and the EIF is in discussions with the Greek authorities as well to dig into that sector and put a very specific fund on the ground, targeting life sciences in specific. These are still in discussion, but we hope to have something by the end of the year.
Well, this is really interesting and probably something that we didn't know much about in Spain previously. There is quite significant ecosystem and community working on all these things, on life sciences, on AI, and new materials, and so on and so forth. Well, as you know, there is a quite reasonable in-size VC ecosystem in Spain, and I think we would all like to have further cooperation between both countries, Greece and Spain, in this activity, the venture capital activity. Of course, back and forth, or even doing things together and investing in third places, all those startups that might come. What is your take on this? How do you think we could accelerate this cooperation between both countries to do more things together? Given the similarities, we probably are in a similar stage, a different size of the countries, but when it comes to venture capital, what could we do so that the companies could help scale up, maybe, and do better things, and in a sense try to avoid doing the same things in two different places, maybe. Yeah. I mean, developing ideas and innovation which has got the same goal and maybe the same path in both countries.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we should all be moving towards this cooperation model now. And I think Spain and Greece have a lot of in common. We share the same cultures, more or less, as Mediterranean countries. And I think Spain, to be fair, has a more developed ecosystem than Greece. So we have a lot to learn from the Greek ecosystem, from the Spanish one. But the Spanish ecosystem has we have an untapped potential here as well. So we can definitely benefit from this cooperation back and forth. We definitely can work more on the networking of the two countries, because I don't think that there is an active networking. I think we have both talked to the fund managers on the ground. There might be a couple that have some exchanges with the Spanish ecosystem, but nothing like concrete. So we could work on more networking, mobilizing both ecosystems to visit, to attend conferences, to actually get an eye on what's happening in both countries. I know that Spain is also mobilizing a lot its ecosystem. It's going to have a lot of financing now from public resources to be mobilized on the ground. And I think there is a lot of benefit also, both on what you're saying, not to be duplicating work, but actually leveraging on each other's job, on what it's done on both sides, so that we can move forward faster. But also not to lose opportunities, because we see now at the European level that we are losing a lot. Like we are just now realizing that we are losing a lot of the large-scale tech companies against competition outside the continent. So we are losing a lot of our big tech companies to the USA, to Asia, and this is now a pan-European problem. And the European Union is just picking up on this, and we are actually implementing a new initiative that's called the European Tech Champions Initiative, where actually Spain is already participating. And this is an initiative to support the very biggest funds that can actually support European tech companies that grow big, because Europe seems to be taking the early stage financing of European tech companies that are obviously very much needed, but also very risky. And when these companies grow, they just go outside of the continent to get the financing. So we take all the risk. We don't get on the upscale of things when they grow bigger. We lose all of that. So Spain has been actually pioneer on this alongside another 5 member states. We hope Greece will also enter that group of member states. That will be a good cooperation also on that ground with Spain. But other than the political or let's say the high level cooperation, I really think we need to work also on the ground like we do now, like to educate people, just communicate to the fund managers, to the startups that we can actually use these networks and they can work together to make it happen for both sides.
Well, I couldn't agree more with your answer, Vivi. I think there is very limited information. I think probably on both sides, in some of the main players in the ecosystem about what the other side is doing. And there is plenty of scope for further informing and cooperating between all of the players, between universities, digital hubs, venture capitalists, startups, and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of work to be done regarding knowing better the companies and the players, so that when we do the networking between them, when we get them together, there's a clear added value to gain. And there might be places or events that could work as the perfect location for that once we've done the previous work, such as I'm thinking now about a couple of things that we organize in Spain and something that is organized here in Greece. In Spain, we have, of course, we've organized South Summits, and we have something new now called the 100 Startup, which is an event where we call startups from all around the world. It's on health. We call startups from all around the world, and we call also end users of potential advances that could be produced by those startups. We get them all together. And we guarantee that the companies, the end users get the pitch by the startups to solve their problems, right? So some sort of like innovative, open innovation, let's say melting pot. And there is something also very interesting here in Greece. In a few weeks, we'll have Beyond. Some Spanish companies, some startups will come over to pitch their solutions. And I think there's a lot to be done on that. So as you said, knowing better the fund managers, knowing better what they're looking forward to do, knowing better the startups, knowing better the verticals that have a future, and trying to get them together so they can do the thing, right? So I think there's pretty much quite some lack of information maybe from that we could supply in our standard jobs. So listen, thank you very much, Vivi, for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for inviting. It's been a very, very nice discussion.
It helps a lot, I think, for our audience to know directly from the people that take care of these things what's happening in the country, and I'm sure it will open opportunities in both directions. Y nosotros nos vemos pronto de nuevo en Oportunidades en Grecia. Aún hay muchísimo por conocer en el país y hablaremos pronto de agroalimentario, digitalización y muchos más. Nos vemos.